Jasmine Moore had always known that education was the key to unlocking a better future. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, she was taught by her mother that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take away from you. Despite the challenges in her community, Jasmine excelled in school, always striving for the highest marks. However, her journey to academic success was never without its hurdles. In her sophomore year at Ridgewood High School, Jasmine encountered a teacher who would forever change the trajectory of her academic life. Not for the better at first, but ultimately for the greater good. Mr. Wilkins, her history teacher, had a reputation for being strict, but also for showing an unmistakable bias towards students of color. His comments were often laced with subtle and not-so-subtle racial undertones, and Jasmine quickly realized that despite her academic achievements, she wasn't always viewed the same as her white peers. She had always been outspoken in class, asking questions and challenging ideas, but Mr. Wilkins didn't seem to appreciate her curiosity the way he did with others. One day, after raising a point during a lecture, he dismissed her, saying, "Jasmine, maybe your time would be better spent focusing on things that are more suited to you." Those words stung, but they also ignited something in Jasmine. She would prove him wrong. Determined to not only excel in Mr. Wilkins's class, but to show him and everyone else what she was capable of, Jasmine began pouring herself into her studies even more. She knew that her intelligence and her ability to think critically were her greatest assets, and no one could take that away from her. At the same time, she had to navigate the systemic barriers that often placed her at a disadvantage, but Jasmine was determined. Her friends noticed the change in her. "You're studying harder than ever," her best friend Emily said one afternoon. "What's going on?" Jasmine smiled and shook her head. "I'm going to show Mr. Wilkins that I'm more than what he thinks I am. I'm going to prove him wrong," she declared. Emily didn't fully understand, but she was there for Jasmine, as always, offering words of encouragement. Jasmine's resolve grew stronger with each passing day, and she began to dedicate herself to every subject with an unmatched fervor. She knew that in order to be successful, she had to not only prove her worth to Mr. Wilkins, but also to herself. The path ahead would be difficult, but she was determined to walk it. It wasn't long before Jasmine's hard work began to pay off. Her grades soared and her involvement in extracurricular activities expanded. She took on leadership roles in the debate club, excelled in the science fair, and volunteered in the community to tutor younger students. However, despite her accomplishments, Mr. Wilkins continued to undermine her. He would often make backhanded comments during class discussions, questioning her insights and belittling her contributions. Jasmine refused to be intimidated, and instead of letting his negativity deter her, it motivated her to work even harder. By the time the final exams arrived, Jasmine felt more prepared than ever. She had studied tirelessly, understanding that this was her chance to prove herself once and for all. Her classmates noticed the change in her too. She had become more confident, more focused, and more determined than ever before. She was no longer just the quiet, hard-working student who kept to herself. Jasmine Moore was becoming someone who was not only recognized for her intelligence, but for her resilience and ability to rise above the challenges that others had placed before her. The day of the final exams arrived, and Jasmine felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and as she walked into Mr. Wilkins's classroom, her mind was sharp, her confidence high. She took her seat and glanced at the other students, many of whom were unaware of the internal battle she had been fighting for the past year. To them, it was just another exam. To Jasmine, it was an opportunity to silence the doubts others had placed on her. She looked toward Mr. Wilkins, who was handing out the exam papers. His cold, calculating eyes met hers for a brief second, and for a moment, she could see the same dismissive attitude that had been evident all year. But Jasmine wasn't fazed. She knew this was her moment to rise. As she began answering the questions, she felt a surge of pride. Every word on the paper was another victory for her. Her mind raced through the material she had studied, her hand gliding over the pages as she tackled the complex concepts and theories that had once seemed out of reach. Jasmine was no longer just answering questions. She was asserting her place in this space. For the next several weeks, Jasmine immersed herself in her studies, ensuring she didn't let any doubts creep in. She had been through too much to let this moment slip away. When the results were finally posted, Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. She walked to the bulletin board, and there, staring back at her, was the result she had worked so hard for, an A+. Not only had she earned the highest grade in Mr. Wilkins' class, but she had also received top marks in every other subject she had studied for. This wasn't just about proving Mr. Wilkins wrong. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. Jasmine's classmates congratulated her, and her teachers offered praise, but it was the acknowledgement from Mr. Wilkins that stood out the most. He approached her quietly after class, a rare moment of humility crossing his features. "Jasmine, you did well on the exam," he said, his tone less dismissive. "I didn't expect this." Jasmine looked him in the eye, her voice steady as she replied, "I told you I was more than what you thought." It wasn't a victory for arrogance, but for quiet strength, for proving that with perseverance, anything was possible. As the year came to an end, Jasmine's reputation as a driven, talented student spread throughout Ridgewood High. She had become a role model to her peers, someone they looked up to not just for her academic prowess, but for her resilience in the face of adversity. However, despite the accolades and recognition, Jasmine knew that her journey was far from over. The next step was college, and she had set her sights on some of the most prestigious schools in the country. She applied to Ivy League universities, each of which seemed like a far-off dream when she first started high school. But now, after everything she had endured and overcome, she felt ready. She knew that if she could conquer the challenges of high school, the university world would be just another place for her to shine. Jasmine had learned that obstacles were merely stepping stones, and every time she faced one, she became stronger. But as she was about to embark on this new chapter, Jasmine faced yet another moment of doubt. Would the world beyond high school, the world of academia, be any kinder to her? Would she face even more prejudice, more assumptions about who she was because of the color of her skin? It was a question she could not answer just yet, but she was determined to find out. Jasmine's resolve only grew stronger when she received acceptance letters from every university she had applied to. She had made it. The challenges she faced in high school were only the beginning of a new journey, and she was ready to prove herself once again. Her hard work had paid off, and now the world was at her feet. But it wasn't just about the acceptance letters. It was about what came next. Jasmine knew she had a responsibility to continue challenging the perceptions placed on students like her. The success she had achieved in high school was not just for her. It was for every student who had ever been told they couldn't succeed because of where they came from or the color of their skin. She had become a beacon of hope for others, someone who could show them that anything was possible, no matter how impossible it seemed. Jasmine's first day at Harvard University was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. She walked onto the campus with a sense of accomplishment, but also a deep awareness of the challenges ahead. As one of the few black students in the room, she couldn't shake the feeling of being under a microscope. But Jasmine refused to be intimidated. She had already faced so much, and this was just another step in her journey. The professors, all with their esteemed degrees and impressive backgrounds, seemed to view her with a certain level of curiosity. It wasn't that they didn't believe in her abilities. They just didn't know what to expect from a young black woman who had come so far, so fast. Jasmine could feel their skepticism, but she didn't let it affect her. In fact, it fueled her desire to prove herself even more. She immersed herself in her studies, tackling each subject with the same vigor and passion that had gotten her this far. She participated in every class discussion, offering perspectives that were sometimes met with surprise, but always respect. Despite the challenges of being a minority in such an exclusive institution, Jasmine had learned that her voice mattered and that she had just as much right to be there as anyone else. Her peers, who initially viewed her with uncertainty, slowly began to take notice of her intelligence, her poise, and her drive. Jasmine wasn't just another student in the classroom. She was someone who brought a unique perspective, someone who could engage in discussions about race, identity, and social justice while offering solutions and ideas that others hadn't considered. But even though she had started to gain respect from her classmates, there were still moments when she felt isolated. One day, after a particularly intense lecture on the history of racial inequality, Jasmine found herself talking to a fellow student, David, who had been quietly observing her during class. "You know, Jasmine," he began, "I've never really thought about things the way you put them. I always saw the world through a very narrow lens, but your insights really opened my eyes." Jasmine was taken aback by his honesty, but appreciated his willingness to listen and learn. They talked for hours that day, discussing everything from the civil rights movement to the current struggles facing Black communities in America. David was eager to understand, and Jasmine was happy to share her thoughts. It was moments like these that reassured her that her place at Harvard wasn't just about academic achievement. It was about making a difference in the world around her. The months passed, and Jasmine's academic achievements continued to soar. She was no longer just a student at Harvard. She had become a respected voice within the university community. She joined various clubs and organizations focused on social justice, where she found like-minded individuals who shared her passion for creating change. One of her most rewarding experiences was leading a seminar on the importance of diversity in education. Jasmine had never been one to shy away from speaking her truth, and this was her chance to share her experiences and offer guidance to other students who may have felt marginalized or overlooked. The seminar was a huge success, and many students who had never considered the barriers that people of color faced in academia left the room with a newfound understanding of how important it was to create an inclusive, equitable environment for all. Jasmine's confidence grew with each success, but there was still a part of her that carried the weight of the prejudice she had faced throughout her life. She knew that even though she had achieved so much, the fight for equality was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Despite all of her achievements, there were still moments when Jasmine had to confront the subtle and overt racism that existed in some corners of her life. In one instance, during a meeting with a group of professors, one of them made a comment that left Jasmine feeling deeply uncomfortable. "I'm impressed by how well you're doing," the professor said, his tone patronizing. "It's not often that someone from your background makes it this far." Jasmine was taken aback, but she remained composed. "I'm here because I earned my place," she replied firmly. "My background doesn't define my abilities or my worth." The professor seemed to hesitate, realizing his words had been more than inappropriate. Jasmine's words had struck a chord, not only with the professor, but with the other faculty members in the room, who had been silently witnessing the interaction. This moment served as another reminder that her journey wasn't just about personal success. It was about challenging the outdated ideas and prejudices that still lingered in academic spaces. Jasmine's resolve only grew stronger with every hurdle she overcame. As the semester progressed, she began to form deeper relationships with her professors and peers, some of whom had initially underestimated her potential. One of her most unexpected allies was Professor Charles, a well-known but somewhat aloof history professor who had once made an offhand remark about how students like her had a tough time in academia. However, over time, Jasmine's brilliance and unwavering confidence won him over. He began to approach her for input on his lectures and even asked her to collaborate on a research paper about the intersectionality of race and gender in historical narratives. The respect that Jasmine garnered from Professor Charles wasn't just about her intellect. It was about the way she had handled every challenge with grace and dignity. She had earned his respect through hard work, and it had paid off. For the first time, Jasmine realized that the barriers she had faced in her earlier years were slowly starting to crumble. This wasn't just her success. It was a shift in the way others viewed the capabilities of black students in academia. But despite her growing influence, Jasmine's journey wasn't without its emotional toll. There were times when she felt overwhelmed, especially when the weight of representing her community felt too heavy. Every time she succeeded, she feared that the small, insidious prejudices would return, and she would be reduced to just another stereotype. The pressure to succeed wasn't just about proving herself. It was about proving that black students could achieve greatness in spaces that had historically excluded them. Jasmine found solace in her journal, where she poured out her thoughts, frustrations, and dreams. Writing became a form of therapy, allowing her to process the complexities of her experience. She would write late into the night, reflecting on how far she had come from the days when she was told she would never amount to anything. Those journal entries became the foundation for a powerful speech that Jasmine would eventually give during her graduation ceremony. It was a speech about resilience, about the strength of black students, and about the importance of dismantling the systems that held so many of them back. Her relationship with her classmates had also evolved. While she had initially felt like an outsider, Jasmine now had a circle of friends who saw her for who she truly was. A brilliant, passionate individual determined to make a difference. One of her closest friends, Maya, had become an advocate for Jasmine's ideas and had helped her organize multiple campus events to discuss race and education. The two of them had worked together on various initiatives, from seminars on diversity to workshops on breaking down barriers in academia. It was through these collaborations that Jasmine's voice grew louder, reaching not just her peers, but also the faculty and staff who had the power to make lasting change. However, as Jasmine continued to navigate her academic journey, she faced more questions about her future. While some professors and classmates encouraged her to pursue graduate studies, Jasmine wasn't sure if she wanted to follow the traditional academic route. She had bigger aspirations that went beyond the confines of academia. Jasmine wanted to take what she had learned and use it to help change the world outside the classroom, to break down systemic barriers in education, and to make it possible for future generations of black students to succeed without the burden of prejudice. The decision weighed heavily on her. She knew she had the potential to become a renowned academic, but she also knew that her true calling lay in creating spaces for others like her. Jasmine began to see herself as more than just a student. She was becoming a mentor, an advocate, and a leader in her own right. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became. Her purpose wasn't to remain in the ivory tower of academia, but to bring the lessons she had learned back to the communities that needed them most. She envisioned a future where black students could attend prestigious universities without feeling isolated or marginalized, where they could thrive without having to constantly prove their worth. Jasmine knew that she couldn't do it alone, but she was ready to begin the work. She was ready to step into a world where the challenges of her past would fuel the success of her future. As Jasmine approached the final year of her undergraduate studies, she became more focused on her long-term goals. With the support of her mentors and peers, she started to shape her vision of creating an educational nonprofit aimed at helping black students navigate the challenges of higher education. She wanted to equip them with the tools they needed to succeed academically, socially, and emotionally. Her dream was to create a space where black students could find mentorship, resources, and community, ensuring that they would never feel alone or unsupported as she had once felt. Jasmine's plan was ambitious, but the more she spoke about it, the more others began to see the potential impact of her vision. Maya, still one of her closest allies, encouraged her to apply for grants and start a fundraising campaign. Jasmine knew this was going to be an uphill battle, but with the experience she had gained at Harvard, she felt ready to face it head-on. The idea for the nonprofit wasn't just a dream, it was born from Jasmine's own struggles. She knew that many students, particularly students of color, faced obstacles that were invisible to their more privileged peers. They weren't just battling academic challenges. They were battling systemic issues, that made it harder for them to succeed. Jasmine recalled her own experiences of being looked over or dismissed by professors, being questioned about her abilities, and even facing outright discrimination from students who didn't think she belonged. These experiences had shaped her determination to ensure that no student would ever have to endure what she had. As she began to map out her nonprofit, Jasmine realized that it was not just about providing academic support. It was about building a community of students who could lean on each other, share resources, and find strength in solidarity. She started reaching out to faculty members, professionals in the field, and even alumni who could offer guidance and expertise. Slowly but surely, the foundation for her nonprofit began to take shape, and Jasmine's dream of making a meaningful difference in the world started to feel more and more tangible. Meanwhile, Jasmine's academic career continued to thrive. She was awarded several prestigious scholarships, and her research on race and education gained recognition from some of the top scholars in the field. Her thesis on the role of education in dismantling systemic racism was hailed as groundbreaking, and she was invited to present her findings at academic conferences across the country. The attention was gratifying, but what mattered most to Jasmine was how her work resonated with others, especially those who were still struggling in an educational system that hadn't always been kind to them. Jasmine had always known that her purpose was to make an impact beyond the walls of the classroom, and now she was beginning to see the fruits of her labor. She had been invited to speak at a number of community events, where she shared her journey, her research, and her vision for a more inclusive and equitable educational system. These experiences further solidified her belief that her true calling was to inspire and uplift others, especially the next generation of Black students who would follow in her footsteps. The more Jasmine spoke out about the inequalities she had faced, the more she realized how far the educational system still had to go. Even though there were institutions like Harvard that were beginning to make strides in diversity and inclusion, there were still many places where racism and bias were entrenched in the fabric of academia. Jasmine's experience at Harvard had been transformative, but it had also made her acutely aware of the work that remained. She knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but she was committed to being part of the solution. The support she had received from her mentors, her peers, and the broader community had given her the strength to keep pushing forward. Jasmine had learned that true success wasn't about being the smartest or the most accomplished. It was about using your voice, your platform, and your influence to make a difference for others. As her graduation day neared, Jasmine realized that she had come full circle. She had started as an uncertain young woman, unsure if she even belonged in such a prestigious institution. But now, she stood at the precipice of a new chapter, confident in her ability to break down barriers and create a legacy that would impact future generations of Black students. As graduation day approached, Jasmine reflected on how far she had come. She had not only overcome the challenges placed in front of her, but had also paved the way for others to follow. The nonprofit she had envisioned was beginning to take shape, and her thesis had earned her recognition in academic circles. However, the journey was far from over. Jasmine understood that the real work began after graduation, where the idealism of academia met the realities of the world outside. With the support of her mentors, she secured a fellowship that allowed her to continue her research while also helping to fund her nonprofit initiative. This was her chance to put her ideas into practice and to start making the difference she had always dreamed of. But as she ventured further into the professional world, Jasmine also encountered challenges that she hadn't anticipated. As a young Black woman entering a field dominated by older, more experienced academics, she was still subjected to microaggressions and was often overlooked for opportunities that seemed to go to her white colleagues. Even though she had earned her place in these spaces, the weight of racism and discrimination continued to shadow her progress. Jasmine found herself constantly battling the assumption that she was simply a product of diversity quotas rather than an accomplished scholar. Despite the setbacks, Jasmine's resolve remained unshaken. She reminded herself of the young woman who had been dismissed in her first years at Harvard, the woman who had been told that she would never make it, that she would never belong. The more she faced these obstacles, the more determined she became to prove that she was not just capable of succeeding, but of excelling in the face of adversity. She poured herself into her non-profit, building a network of students and mentors who shared her vision of making education accessible to everyone, regardless of race or background. Jasmine's organization began to grow, partnering with universities, local schools, and community organizations to provide scholarships, mentorship programs, and resources for Black students who needed them most. As her influence expanded, Jasmine found herself at the forefront of discussions about diversity in education, invited to speak on panels, and asked to contribute to policy discussions about how to make education more inclusive. While it was gratifying to see the changes she had dreamed of starting to take place, Jasmine knew that the fight for true equity in education was far from over. There were still countless students who faced the same challenges.
She had, and there were still systems that needed to be dismantled. But as Jasmine looked back on her journey, from a student who was unsure of her place in academia to a leader in the field of educational equity, she knew she had already accomplished something remarkable. Looking toward the future, Jasmine realized that her work was only beginning. Her non-profit was thriving, but her true impact would come when she could build a generation of students who would rise above the barriers of race and class to reach their full potential. She wanted to see a world where no Black student ever again had to question their worth or feel the sting of racism in a classroom. Jasmine dreamed of a future where the next generation of Black scholars would not only enter academia, but would thrive, knowing that their place there had been earned and that their success was not an exception, but a norm. With this vision in mind, Jasmine rededicated herself to her mission, knowing that, though the road ahead would be difficult, the change she sought was worth every challenge. She had already proved so many people wrong. Now, it was time to prove to the world just how far a Black woman could go when given the opportunity to soar. In the final chapter of Jasmine's remarkable journey, she looked back on everything she had accomplished. Her non-profit had grown into a nationwide movement, empowering thousands of Black students across the country. The doors she had opened for these students were a testament to her resilience and the unwavering belief she had in the power of education. Jasmine had not only overcome the racist prejudices of her past, but had also become a beacon of hope for those who faced the same challenges she had once encountered. Her organization had provided scholarships, mentorship, and resources to countless young people, giving them the tools they needed to succeed in higher education and beyond. What had started as a dream to level the playing field for Black students had blossomed into something much bigger, an educational revolution that was changing the face of academia. But despite all her success, Jasmine never lost sight of the very core of her mission, to ensure that no student would ever feel out of place simply because of their race, background, or circumstances. Her life's work had become a legacy that would continue to impact generations long after she had passed on the torch. As she stood before a room of incoming scholars, Jasmine felt an overwhelming sense of pride. These students were not just recipients of the opportunities she had fought so hard to provide. They were the living embodiment of the change she had envisioned years ago. She saw in their faces the hope, determination, and promise of a future where racial barriers in education were no longer insurmountable. Jasmine realized that she had achieved everything she had set out to do and more. She had not only proven her worth to the world, but had also paved the way for others to do the same. Jasmine's life was a testament to the power of persistence, the strength of community, and the undeniable impact one person could have when they chose to rise above the obstacles placed in their path. The young girl who had once doubted her place in the world of academia had become a trailblazer, and her work would continue to inspire future generations of students to never give up, no matter the odds. In her final moments of reflection, Jasmine thought back to the teacher who had once tried to diminish her abilities, to the moments of doubt and loneliness, and to the countless times she had been told she would never belong.
She had proven them all wrong, and in doing so, she had changed not only her own life, but the lives of countless others who followed in her footsteps. Jasmine knew that her journey wasn't just about personal success. It was about the collective victory of a community that had been underestimated for far too long. As she moved into the next phase of her life, she knew that the fight for racial equity in education was far from over. But she was no longer just a participant in the struggle. She was a leader, a mentor, and a symbol of what could be accomplished when you refuse to let anything or anyone stand in the way of your dreams. Jasmine's story was one of resilience, perseverance, and the undeniable power of education to transform lives, and she would continue to inspire, uplift, and pave the way for others as long as she had the strength to do so. This concludes Jasmine's story, a journey of overcoming adversity, making a lasting impact, and showing the world that no one, no matter their race or background, should ever feel limited by the constraints of the systems they enter.